I was saying that I want to get basically the wildest or hottest takes from you around kingdom culture
Ah,
and some of the things that like are most likely to earn the most ire from others. Basically, it will support I make up you thinking more at the edge and so owning those in connection with like my listening as well as just hearing from an outside view afterwards when I debrief with Alta, like what stood out and or like what doesn't. I
Alton.
imagine that to be right. My intent is for you to like take a wider swing at it with the intent to stretch the Overton window even more of like what's plausible for people and or for yourself even. I make up that there can be an even deeper owning of it in the fertile listening of other people who also have first principles listening.
So kingdom culture is based on several ideas. The overarching idea is that normie culture or default culture is the term I'll use. It's a little less loaded. Um, that default culture is just sick. And it's sick for a number of different reasons. Um, some of the biggest ones are that default culture today, especially during the woke era, which is thankfully dying, um, taught people the exact opposite of what kingdom culture does. It taught people that their feelings are someone else's responsibility, and that if you're making me feel a certain way because of a microaggression or because of some word you use that offends me or because of some political belief you have or whatever, then I have a right to demand and indeed coerce through shaming, through cancel culture, through whatever, um, to get you to behave in ways that make me feel the ways that I want to feel and that keep me from having to feel the ways that I don't want to feel. And it's very sick, in my view. It's very manipulative. It's very coercive. And maybe worst of all, it violates one of the foundational principles of actually having growth. And I mean spiritual growth as well as growth here in the 3D. And that is the principle that the triggers are the guides. If I'm triggered, if I'm having an emotional reaction to something you did or something you said, and I blame that on you, then I never get to the bottom of my stories. I never self examine what's causing me to actually feel the way I am, what beliefs I'm carrying with me that are going unexamined and that are unconsciously coloring every experience I have. But if I treat the triggers of the guides and I treat my hurt or my resentment or my anger at the way you have behaved as something that provides information about me instead of information about you, then I get to grow. And so, one of the foundational concepts of kingdom culture is in the culture, we own our triggers. I don't get to require you to behave differently or expect you to behave differently so that I get to feel things I want and don't have to feel things I don't. That's far easier said than done. And it's amazing how many, especially new people stepping into the culture, understand that up front, agree to it up front, and yet just compulsively struggle to do it because default culture has deeply embedded into each of us the idea that my feelings are your responsibility, not mine. So that's sort of principle one. Principle two is that we are a touch starved culture. I think humans evolved under conditions where um, our nervous systems were getting much more frequent, much more consistent physical containment, physical human touch, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, all the things that come from that. And so we are explicitly a touch-based culture. Everybody stepping into this container is agreeing up front to sensual touch, not necessarily sexual, but sensual touch with all kingdom members, subject always to the right to safe word. So people can always safe word for any or no reason. But sensual touch from all kingdom members and intimacy. I think a huge part of normie culture is that people walk around guarded. They walk around with their hearts closed. They walk around hiding themselves because they don't want to look at themselves vulnerably and intimately. They don't actually want to see others in their vulnerability and their intimacy. And again, it creates just a disease that kingdom culture is trying to play some small role in remedying. And then sort of the third thing in kingdom culture, and maybe the thing that is initially most challenging for those from default culture, and especially woke varieties of default culture, which has pretty much defined default culture for the last 15, 20 years, is hierarchy. The kingdom is explicitly hierarchical. So, and people coming into the kingdom agree to obey anybody above them in the hierarchy, subject always to their right to safe word. And that's so just those things alone that I've covered so far. Take somebody from outside culture, bring them into kingdom culture, and oh my gosh, like this is going to bring up all of their shit. The requirement to own their triggers is going to bring up their shit. The requirement to submit to hierarchy is going to bring up their shit. Physical touch for a lot of people is going to bring up their shit. They may have a lot of conditioning depending on where they're from that this, physical touch is only supposed to happen in certain discrete, tiny, time-limited containers rather than it being something that's just readily available. Come sit in my lap when I'm sitting on the couch if you want to, whatever. And so it brings up a lot of people's resistance, which if they will own their trigger, points to their own stories, which if they'll lean into those stories and work over time to integrate those stories through certain processes that we use in the kingdom that can involve, on occasion, use of psychedelics, then we actually all get to grow together and we all get to grow closer and life becomes more easeful, more transparent, less posturing, less competitiveness, less manipulation, less ego. So those are sort of the core principles. Well, sort of the next concept is polarity. I want to explain it, and then I want to explain how it relates to hierarchy, because this can get really confusing. This is one of the more challenging things that people have when they step into kingdom culture. Archetypally speaking, we have the masculine and the feminine. And archetypally speaking, the feminine is flow and it's awesomely powerful, but it's only awesomely powerful when it is contained and directed. I often use a river as an analogy. The feminine is like the flowing water of the river, and the masculine is the river banks that is containing the river. If you didn't have the masculine, the feminine would just spread out over the surface and sort of evaporate. So archetypally speaking and evolutionarily speaking, the masculine and feminine are interdependent and necessarily so. Normie culture rejects this. Normie culture, default culture says that, oh, men are just men because they were conditioned to be men, and women are just women because they were conditioned to be women. And there's no inherent masculine, feminine nature to either one. Um, and we can all be everything unto ourselves, and we don't need the other pole. Um, I think all of that is incorrect. So the kingdom is explicitly also recognizes polarity, which is masculine containment of the feminine nature. Now, default culture would say that that means that the masculine is controlling and leading and dominating, and the feminine's just subordinate, lesser than, etc. This is not the case. The feminine power is awesome power. The river carved the Grand Canyon out of the structure, right? It's a different kind of power, and it's exercised and wielded differently, but it's no less potent. And so the masculine power is the power of structure, direction, focus, um, implementation. The feminine power is the power of favor, both at an archetypal level and at an evolutionary level. At an archetypal level, masculine seeks, needs, desires feminine favor. At an evolutionary level, males seek, desire feminine favor. And so women are actually exercise extraordinary power in culture. Even in default culture, it's denied, repressed, shadowed in default culture, but it's still very much there, simply by choosing who they give their favor to, what men they give their favor to, and under what circumstances they give their favor to. Because men will generally adapt their behaviors to get feminine favor. And if the feminine wants wokeism, the world will go woke. And if the feminine wants something else, the world will do something else. And men will implement feminine desires through the structure, through the containment, through the focus, through the implementation. But it's ultimately feminine desires that are setting the agenda. Feminism shadows this. Feminism denies this. Feminism says that the only type of power that is real power is the masculine flavor of power, and it victimizes itself, and it disempowers itself, and it causes women to compete with men rather than engaging interdependently with men, with feminine favor determining how masculine power gets expressed ultimately in the world. Within the kingdom, that's all very explicit. Within the kingdom, women are encouraged to reward men when they show up in grounded ways, in open-hearted ways, in disciplined ways, in self-contained ways, and to reward that with favor, to reward that with touch, to reward that with attention, to reward that with compliment, to reward that with sex, and to block when men in the kingdom show up from an ungrounded place, when they show up with leaky energy or sucky energy or not self-contained ways, when they're hitting on you as a woman and you sense that their sense of self depends on how you respond, then block them. Lovingly block them, open-heartedly block them, teach them how to show up better by doing so. But don't reward men showing up with ungrounded, leaky, pervy, um, creepy, sucky, needy energy.
Again, as a meta note, I'm extended how much more crisply or concisely this is like landing in my nervous system too. I imagine also because there's a strong like pull dynamic where I'm especially more now a motivated buyer to syndicate this in a totally new culture, how I can simply articulate this and also feeling really glad into that I can pump this through AI and have a crisp outcome too. As a meta note, I just want to name how crisply and simply articulated that was and how that's probably been the most concise useful way that I can imagine myself articulating that to some people. Today, a couple huge authentic relating facilitators who bring together huge groups of people who she described herself as a high touch human, but also framing it as a touch starved community. Like I think that that'd be very congruent with her. And I could imagine her doing some events or like also immediately connecting her with you. And I'm like, oh, that seems just very aligned. Um, and also the triggers are the guides is a principle that I've been finding that really because I didn't have that as a upfront agreement with the container of the friends that I brought out here to Bali. I see how that my lack of setting that I'm paying the cost of that and how cleanly that gets right to the bottom and it's like the first one and like thanks for helping reiterate that into my own nervous system. Having a lot of firsthand experiences where a lot of those exact words were thrown at the container that I created. Just a lot of pain for having not deepen into presetting or pre-framing. You know, the ounce of pre-framing is worth pounds of reframing afterwards. It's
Mm,
just
yeah.
really with your gracious articulation and also how deeply you let yourself be touched when you're present to like how that's people who are in a perpetual victim state is literally in living hell. And
Literally.
that
Yeah.
really clicked for me too. And I'm like, wow. And I make up that there's just a lot of people and like specifically a couple people who, yeah, I was more recently interacting with that I make up. It's very hell-like imagining trying them on. And there are like second order or secondhand spillover effects too in their presence, and then having all of what seemed like good faith actions be interpreted in like the shittiest ways, and how owie that is for everybody. We can do assessments like the Cook-Grider ego development work, where you can infer someone's ego development stage based off of how they use language. And you have them like Nathaniel Brandon's sentence stem completion practices. You have them answer those like from the gut without them thinking about it. And you can develop a model that's pretty crisp, weave it through the Kingdom culture standards, and then develop custom curriculum based off of that to support them in integrating and raising their levels like in spiral dynamics or something as well. And I
I
think
love
that's
that. And if that could, that could be a tool for help identifying how deep somebody is in victim identity, that would be very useful.
Like some people that I know that I close with, blaming me for like so much shit, and then it doesn't matter like how much you try to help them, it just doesn't work. Um, yeah, because they're not owning it in their own stuff. It's just like, yeah, what he said, it hits me. I don't know how to describe it. It's just like deep, deep talk, and yeah.
you don't have to use your brain as much anymore. I have it that when you trust your intuition and you really lean into your body's felt sense moment by moment,
Mm.
your body is one of the greatest compasses that our mind often tries to override and take over. And like we then encounter all sorts of downstream negative impacts.
Yeah, yeah. Our body holds everything, tells everything.
And it takes one conversation at a time, just like these ones that I make up is how we shift culture. I look forward to pulling this through some AI things and see what happens on here.
Mhm.
Thank you. All future yous who made this happen.